Coming up, a side of Nick Saban that we rarely get to see, and a Florida coach tells Gators fans what they want to hear about Emory Jones. We'll talk about it all next, right here on SEC Country Live. Hello everyone and welcome to SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. It is good to be with you today in all the various outlets that the show has been available since we started. We're on YouTube and everything's up and running. For those of you on Facebook who had some issues yesterday, we're glad to let you know that we're all squared away there. We're happy to talk some SEC football with you here over the course of the next 60 minutes. And what a better thing to be doing this time of year.
Yeah, I love it. It's obviously mid-March. We're coming up, or not mid-March, into March. We're coming up on a lot of these spring games getting to get underway, and we're starting to see some of these battles start to take shape in some of these quarterback and running back positions.
So what do you say we dive into it the way we always do? It's our big news in the SEC today. We call it our First and 10 on our SEC Country Live here. And item number one on the list, and look, the truth is, I'm not a Bama hater, but I do sort of enjoy needling you about Alabama every now and then. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. We're no different than any other people that you know. It's like we just sort of like poking each other every now and then. But the truth is, I think Alabama's actually done something kind of cool here. I think this is pretty cool. We don't normally show you this long of a video. We try to keep our videos relatively short. This is about 50 seconds or so, but we talked not too long ago about Alabama building that brand new barbershop to put in its football complex, a place for the players, and apparently, as you're about to see, some ex-players kind of come hang out, get a little trim, and also do as you do when you go to the barbershop, have a little conversation, a little chit-chat, and things like that. Well, Nick Saban gets involved in this, Julio Jones in this video. Everybody kicking back and relaxing and making Alabama looking like, well, about the most fun place in the world to play college football. Take a look at this video. Pretty well done by Alabama. It'll set us up for a conversation.
You know, the thing, too, with the league, though, man, you can't get caught up in the environment you're at. Like, you know, we know what hard work is, but you can kind of get lax when you go there. You know what I'm saying? If the workload is not like how it is here, you gotta find it. You gotta find what works for you. You know what I'm saying? So, like, you just gotta find what.
But I've gotten soft around here in the last little bit.
Yeah, we've been talking about that. I'm glad you brought it up.
So anyway, that's the video from Alabama. It's basically setting up like a little web series, I guess they're going to do there. But it's essentially, you know, a relaxed, lighter side of Nick Saban, talking about how he's kind of gotten soft here a little bit. And, you know, you see everybody sort of hanging out, relaxing. This is totally staged. It's totally put on. I mean, Nick Saban is not sitting down having that casual conversation with anybody ever. But the whole thing, I got to tell you, I have to admit, I don't like admitting this, not what I want to say, it's actually pretty well done.
Yeah, no,
pretty well done.
I got to admit, there's something that you just said I think is pretty accurate from everything I know. I've been to that complex a million times. I don't think I've walked in there and just had a convo, you know, a casual sit-down conversation with Nick Saban, especially not in a barbershop. You know, that's something obviously new they've added, but it's almost like a couple of those guys come up there to work out. You can see maybe Julio coming up there to maybe run some routes and being like, hey, by the way, while you're here, you want to meet this camera crew and Nick Saban down in the barbershop dudes. But I think it's a cool look, and this was tweeted out obviously by offensive line coach Brent Key. I think it kind of gives you a little bit of insight. And listen, when I saw this video, I was so glad Julio said that. And that small little part where Coach Saban says, you've gotten soft. And Julio's like, you know what? By the way, since you brought that up, I got a little something to say about that. Because us older players that went through those first couple of training camps with Nick Saban, he does look like he's got a little something. You remember it was even
tougher than it is now.
Oh, my God.
You know, when the story of the Bama barbershop first broke, to the extent that's a story that breaks, you actually weren't here. We talked about it without you one day. And it's one of the few things that almost universally everybody in our comment section agreed was a good idea. That was sort of a, you know, when you hear about like putt-putt courses and water slides and waterfalls and things like that, sometimes you scratch your head and you wonder, okay, so what value is that to recruits? But kind of a nice place to get your hair cut, kind of a relaxing place to sort of kick back and sort of chop it up, as they say. I mean, that is kind of a nice thing, kind of a cool thing. And this video actually does a really good job of capturing
No, I agree with you. It's something that I wondered when I first saw it. I was like, you know, how are recruits going to look at that and say, boy, that's something I really need? Because players that are on campus there realize how valuable that is. You know, you get the one guy that comes. You know, there's a guy that comes to the dorm and everybody pays him $20 each. Or there's, you know, you have somebody you go to at a certain barbershop, Jim's Barbershop down the street, and you pay that guy $20 each, and you get your hair cut and you go through all that. So to have somebody at the complex that does that day in and day out and kind of a gathering spot, I don't know that recruits value it as much as actually current players do, but I think that video does a good job of kind of reaching out to everybody on social media and being like, look how cool this is. And I'm with you. I think they did a little bit over the top and saying, look, Nick Saban's here, Julio Jones is here, Eddie Jackson here. But I think that does a good job of reaching out. I think this is part of the newfound stage of kind of younger crowd when it comes to recruiting.
A lot of comments I want to get to. Greg Steele's got a funny one. We'll get to that one in just a minute. Let me get Chad Clark says we're building a barbershop at UGA, just trying to figure out where we want to put the cameras. I mean, there is something to the fact that the barbershop almost does feel like sort of a made-for-TV type set, almost like it's very on prop there.
It's a selling tool, you know. Like, why not put a camera in there, get a little selling tool going, and say, hey, listen, Nick, get down here. We've got Julio in the building. Got a couple guys getting cut. Let's get this thing set up.
James Ward says, dang, that thing's professionally produced. And yeah, for the most part, all these SEC teams have really professional video departments now. Some are better than others. I've said, not to get too deep in the weeds, I think South Carolina does this stuff probably better than anybody.
Ole Miss.
Ole Miss is pretty good. Yeah. That Alabama video right there is a run for the money for anything that we've shown here on SEC Country Live.
I definitely, and this is, you got to dig a little bit deeper than this with me, because we've talked about it, and it's been one of these new things with this new Alabama staff, and this is just a new look. It's like I said, I think Brent Key is one of the only holdovers, but for them to put this video out on social media, don't think for 1 second this isn't very calculated by Nick Saban.
Roger Willis says, oh, look, a relaxed version of Nick Saban, that's rare. And, you know, you probably had to shoot 9 hours of video to get Saban and that relaxed.
It's not.
For 15 seconds.
It's not that rare.
Really?
It's not that rare. I've told you guys in the show, this is Nick Saban around his players. This is the Nick Saban on the inside of the building. It's not until he steps in front of the cameras and has to meet with people that ask him the same question a million times over, or CBS Sports or NBC Sports or ESPN, that's when you get the amped up version. On the field, the amped up version. This is the Nick that a lot of players have come to know and love. That's why a lot of his old players love him.
Christopher P. Shooter Smith says, BA, that's well put together. You might want to hire that guy for SEC Country Live. First of all, you got your information twisted. I don't get to hire anybody around here. Plus, I wouldn't trade anything for the people we have working on our show every single day. But it was a good job there by the folks that put that together. Esteban Estevez says a lazy river is the best thing to have with a beer garden. So I guess it's UCF that has the lazy river. Do you remember that? I've heard that before. Yeah. Their football complex, they've got a lazy river. I don't think Nick Saban wants the word lazy attached to anything at his football complex.
I think it was Clemson that has the putt-putt.
I think so.
Putt-putt. They might have a lazy river as well. So this is definitely. I think Clemson was maybe the first one to have the barbershop, but this is something I definitely think something like this is going to catch on in the long run.
All right, a lot of you also in the comment section mentioned the fact that we're back on Facebook today after not having been here yesterday. In the comment section a moment ago, who was it that I was going to give credit to for this? I forget who it was now, but somebody was saying you got the Georgia scandal that broke yesterday with the weird guy and the camera, whatever. And he says it was Greg Steele who said this. It was Greg Steele in the comment section who said that scandal broke and mysteriously SEC Country Live's on Facebook yesterday. Once again, this is giving me way too much power than I actually have there.
Yeah, definitely. Listen, it's like I said yesterday. Listen, that scandal is something we could talk about all day, but it's not like we can be like, how does this affect the football team? You know, how does this affect Georgia's spring game? How does it affect Kirby Smart's tenure? There's nothing we can analyze about that. So it is what it is. A lot of you guys are asking the question about, can we see the video? We showed the video before we started talking about it. So you guys can run back later and see the video, or you can find it on Brent Key's Twitter.
Yeah, on YouTube, y'all correct me if I'm wrong. On YouTube, you can actually rewind the show during the show, right? I think you can't do that on Facebook. You got to wait till the whole thing's over. But on YouTube, you can actually rewind during the show. I'm not quite sure how that works with like the space-time continuum, but you can get that done. Speaking of Greg Steele, I love his comment here. The cameras in the Bama barbershop, he says apparently Georgia and Alabama like cameras everywhere.
Yeah, that's 10-4.
Maybe a little too soon for some people on that joke, but Greg, I have to admit, I thought that was pretty funny. Also, some of you also kind of mentioned the fact that you weren't able to find us yesterday. We tried to get the word out to as many people as we could, but we're glad to be back in a working order here in every form and fashion for SEC Country Live today. We'll take more of your comments with the Bama Barbershop. Let me move on, though, to item number 2 on our SEC Country Live First in 10 list. And one of the things that you and I talk about a lot, or at least I bring it up a lot, you may not remember us talking about this, is sometimes there is a very different tone established between text that you read and a comment that you hear. This is an example of that for me from Florida. On Dog Nation Daily this morning, I talked about how Brian Johnson, the Florida quarterback coach, was praising Emory Jones and trying to really put the best foot forward for Emory Jones in his first few spring practices at Florida. I thought this might be a bit of a PR campaign by the Gators to sort of get Jones in that conversation after he'd been working as the fourth-string quarterback for most of the spring. But when you hear the text of what Brian Johnson, the quarterback coach, says here, you judge for yourself on this and you tell me what you think. Does it come across as sort of praising and complimentary as the text reads that it might? Here is Brian Johnson asked about Emory Jones. How has his acclimation to college quarterback at spring practice been? Here is what Brian Johnson, the Gators quarterback coach, has to say about his hotshot incoming freshman.
He's talented. It's great that he got in early so he can get the spring ball. He's getting some really, really valuable reps. Throwing him in with the ones and the twos. So I mean, he's getting real reps, and we're throwing it all at him to see what he can handle. So he's done a good job, just in terms of getting himself ready to play. But obviously his best football is still ahead of him, and just like everybody else, we got a long way to go. But early on, he's done some things that have flashed and shown why he was so coveted as a recruit.
So it's kind of interesting, at the end there he says he's shown a lot of flash and shown the reason why he's so coveted as a recruit, but there was a lot of bass in his voice when he said that, not a lot of energy when he said that. I'm not looking to nitpick here, but that was not the most overwhelming praise of Emory Johnson from Brian Johnson, the Gators quarterback coach. Is that a reason for you to be concerned if you're a Florida fan?
Well, I think Florida fans would be the first one to tell you they knew this was going to be a project coming in. A lot of people, obviously. The question has been whether or not he's a better fit for the offense and whether you want to take those lumps with him. I don't think anybody expected Emory Jones to just take over game one and the Gators to run the table. I mean, maybe Gators fans can tell me I'm wrong, but I think that the expectation was Emory Jones would take his lumps in year one. Do you want him to take him on the bench, or do you want him to take him getting accustomed on the field to Dan Mullen's offense? You're right, though. He didn't have a ton of bass in his voice. And he said, listen, he's got a long way to go, but you can see the skill set there. And we talked about the two words yesterday that I think are scary for Gators fans: raw talent. When you talk about raw talent at Emory Jones, you don't want to hear about raw talent. You want to hear about, boy, he's lighting it up. Boy, he's throwing the ball on a string right now. Boy, he's making all the right reads, doing all the right things. Raw talent in a lot of situations and a lot of quarterback rooms will get that coach fired. I mean, that's just the bottom line. Raw talent will get you fired all day. You have to have the development and the skill set to get on the field. So I agree with you. I mean, he didn't say it with a lot of bass in his voice, but I think this just kind of goes along with what a lot of Florida fans are probably already thinking.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the parts that I don't like, I'm a Florida fan, the idea of we're throwing a lot at him right now, that sort of makes it sound like he's having a hard time keeping up. The notion that his best football is in front of him, even if that is true, he's obviously going to get better over the course of his time there. I mean, it almost describes a guy who comes across a little bit overwhelmed by the early stages of these Florida practices.
Well, he's going to be overwhelmed. I mean, I don't. There hasn't been a lot of guys that, especially at the quarterback position, that have gone.
You think Tua Tagovailoa was overwhelmed in Alabama spring practice last year?
I think he was last year. I don't think there's any doubt about it. I think the same goes for Jake Fromm. But here's what happens for some of these, a lot of these young guys. This happens at every position. These guys get on campus, and then guess what? You go through the install, you learn 5 plays. The next day you learn 5 plays. The next day after that you learn 10 plays. You go through a scrimmage. You're grading the scrimmage. It's not till you get a couple of days off and you get past that G-Day or A-Day game or the Florida spring scrimmage, and then you take a breath, and then you go back and watch all that film, and then you say, boy, I remember that play, and then you get that confidence, and then you get accustomed to what things are going on in front of you. So I'm with you, and everybody knows he's going to be a project. I think it's going to be till fall camp till we figure out how far he has to go.
Brian Wright says he's trying to build Emory Jones up, and that's what I initially thought, Brian. When you see the headline at SEC Country, it says, something to the effect of Emory Jones shows why he's such a highly regarded recruit, and that to me sounds like the kind of quote that's meant to build Emory Jones up. But when you listen to the audio there from Brian Johnson, if I'm a Florida fan, or if maybe even I'm Dan Mullen, I say, how about we try a little harder to build him up? Because honestly, when you come off that quote from Brian Johnson there, it doesn't seem like Emory Jones is too built up here in the mind of his quarterback coach, and that sort of confidence boost he gets from the pat on the back from the coaches. It sort of leaves a little something wanting with those comments from Brian Johnson there.
And I think it's going to continue to go that route, because the bottom line is this: quarterback coaches, not a lot of times in spring football, are answering questions about the fourth-string quarterback. And that's what he is. I mean, the ceiling is there for Emory Jones when you look at what his career could be, especially under Dan Mullen. But he's still the fourth-string quarterback at Florida. He still has a long way to go. So I'm with you. He's not, at this point, I mean, what have they been through? 5-6 practices down at Florida. He's not going to come out and say, boy, Emory Jones, is going to be a world beater next year. I think some of that recruitment, has to kind of get through Emory Jones's head. He has to have some time to breathe. I don't think it's a disappointment to Florida fans if you look at it and say, boy, Emory Jones, there's no shot in him getting on the field this year. I think that a lot of people understand that he was a project, like I said.
Let me fly through a few comments here. James Ward says he still looks like a freshman. Chad Clark says Mullen does well with development when he has a great quarterback to work with. I guess we'll have to wait and find out just how teachable and coachable Emory Jones is going to be. Corey Jones says, too bad Emory Jones likes to throw the ball to the other team. Here's the thing on interceptions. I know people made a little bit of a big deal about the fact that Felipe Franks threw an interception in the open practice for Florida on Saturday. The honest truth is, I don't care as much about interceptions as everybody else does. What I want are quarterbacks that can make throws, make big throws, make gutsy throws. I can live with an interception here and there if you can advance the ball deep down the field. And I just think this notion that we want to put handcuffs on quarterbacks to say, don't ever make a mistake. Well, I mean, how does that work for you in most areas of life? If you live your whole life avoiding mistakes, you miss out on opportunities usually. I think for quarterbacks, it's the same way. If you spend your whole, playing career, practice, opportunities trying to avoid mistakes, you're also avoiding big throws too. If you look at Florida the last few years, with the exception of one Hail Mary against Tennessee, there haven't been any big throws for Florida as of late.
I couldn't disagree with you more about your premise of, boy, interceptions are kind of an overrated statistical category. Interceptions are what will get you beat. I mean, interceptions every time. Every football coach says this. The turnover margin will get you beat every time. It's the biggest indicator of how your season went at the end of the year when you get there and say, we were this in turnover margin or we were that. If you have a bad turnover margin, you are a bad football team. And I look at a guy like Jake Bentley, and we're going to talk about him a little bit later in the show, but Jake Bentley was 18 touchdowns, 12 interceptions last year. That has to be corrected. You need Jake Bentley under that 10 interception plateau. You need him throwing 25 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. That's how South Carolina gets to the next level. There's nothing worse as an offensive lineman. You drive down the field, you get 50 yards in a rushing attack, and then your quarterback throws an out route and it's picked off. And then all of a sudden you're sitting on the bench and the other team's taking it the other way. That will kill your football.
But look at Sam Darnold. He's thrown his interceptions. That kills your football team. But you know what? That gutsy throw he makes in between two defenders that goes for a touchdown when you were in a 3rd and long situation, that helps as much as it hurts. And, speaking of hurts, to go back to the point of interceptions killing you, if just avoiding interceptions was enough to be a good quarterback, then Jalen Hurts is the greatest quarterback of all time. Yeah. But he's not going to start for Alabama because he plays the game in a box about this big in terms of what he allows himself to do, what coaches allow him to do, because, frankly, avoiding interceptions in and of itself is an overrated skill.
I think there has to be a balance. I mean, I'll go there with you. There has to be a balance. But you can't look at, 12 interceptions on the year. And listen, Sam Darnold was great. I mean, he might be the first round, pick of the draft. But USC wasn't winning a national title with Sam Darnold. They just weren't. I mean, they didn't get where they wanted to be, and a lot of it had to do with some of the turnovers that Sam Darnold had in some of the biggest games. The game is different in college. You can overmatch with talent. The only way that some of those teams that are less talented than you, like a lot of the teams that Florida's going to be facing throughout this year, for some team like Kentucky to jump up and beat Florida, they're going to have to throw interceptions, and that's just the bottom line. Florida should be having a lot of these games played where they are more talented than the other team. They just can't turn the ball over.
Marquise Hudson says Emory Jones is going to be better than Jake Fromm. We'll see how that plays out. For now, let's move on to item number 3 of our SEC Country Live First in 10 list. And you see Jeremy Pruitt sort of growing in his role as Tennessee head coach here, really feeling comfortable in terms of what he's demanding from his players there in Knoxville. Vols kind of also put out a video of him, and I really like what you see here. This is a guy to me that looks more like a head coach, bringing good energy. If you're a Tennessee fan, I know you'll love this. Here's a little bit of a video produced by the Vols.
Guys, we have to learn how to practice. We have to learn how to strain. We have to learn how to compete. And we have to learn how to do it over and over and over again. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Let's go. They're motioning in here to block you. There you go. You don't line up here. This is where you line up, right here.
To me, coaching's about motivating people, and there's different ways to motivate young men.
Well, get off the ground and go compete. You got me? All right?
You got to figure out a way to get the most out of them.
When the tackle goes that way and he ain't trying to cut you off, what is it?
It's coming back.
It's a boot.
Yeah.
It's a boot.
Yes, sir.
Okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, know that.
All right.
Everybody wants to have success, but everybody don't want to do it all the time.
Schamberger, are you tired? Are you tired? You're acting like you're tired. Go! Go! go.
So what I love from Jeremy Pruitt in that video, you see, and listen, I know these videos are heavily edited, and there's actually a lot more to that video that you can see if you check out the Vols on Twitter. But in the parts they show of Pruitt on the field, coaching during practice, you see three things that you think of like Saban disciples bringing to your program: practice pace, encouraging, pick up the tempo during practice, go a little harder. Also challenging for competition. You hear a specific moment when he does that. Like I said, this is all heavily edited to make Pruitt look in a favorable light, but I think the video kind of works in that regard. The other thing that you see is just some hardcore instruction. Now, I didn't play football, so a lot of this goes in one ear and out the other, but he says, hey, if you see this, recognize that as a bootleg from the quarterback. I mean, that's that sort of like tangible defensive instruction from a guy in Pruitt who obviously knows that side of the ball great. If you're a Tennessee fan, I think you're lapping all of that up. It's an edited video. Who's to say that Pruitt's not going to be overwhelmed by this job when games actually start being played? But that's what you want to see from him during spring practice.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, we talked about calculated video out of Alabama and you editing these videos in video department. You saw some of the graphics on the field. You got obviously Jeremy Pruitt in a very positive light. But listen, when I watched that video, I got butterflies for Tennessee fans. This is something Tennessee fans haven't had for the last few years under Butch Jones. You watch this instruction, and he talks in that video piece about effort. He talks about these guys going out and having effort, saying, listen, he says, we got some guys that have bought in and some guys that haven't, and maybe we can have some of these guys that kind of catch on and bring it in. And if not, we're not going to be good, and if we have the guys buy in, we will be good. I think that's such a breath of fresh air for Tennessee fans, in my opinion. I think they've got to feel so good about what they saw on campus.
And I'm going to show you a quote here from Jeremy Pruitt in terms of what he has liked about his team. And if these are carefully chosen words, I think he's choosing the right words in order to sort of instill that message for the program. Let me show you what Jeremy Pruitt recently said about his Tennessee team. I read this at SECCountry.com. He says, I'm really starting to like this team. Being around these guys, I sense a bunch of guys that are hungry and maybe have a chip on their shoulder. Not all of them, but maybe enough of them.
Right.
And maybe we can make it where it's contagious. I even like the part where he says it's not everybody, because that way it shows he's not lying. You know what I'm saying? If he's like, hey, this whole team has impressed me, then obviously that's just puffering and he's lying. But the fact that he says, I like what I'm seeing from these guys, not everybody, but most of them, I mean, it's believable. And if you're a Vols fan, you're rallying behind that.
I couldn't agree with you more. I'm telling you right now, I was so excited for Tennessee fans when I saw this. And I was so amped up about it, because this is something that Butch Jones is out there saying, boy, these guys are really competing. No matter what, they're really competing. This is Jeremy Pruitt, and it reminded me of a quote I've given you guys a ton of times in the show about when Nick Saban got to Alabama. There was a group of guys that weren't buying in, and you know what he said? As soon as we can replace you, we will replace you. And he went out and got the #1 recruiting class in the class of 2008, and he did just that. He replaced those guys that didn't want to buy in. And so I feel like that's that version from Jeremy Pruitt that says, listen, we have some guys that are buying in and they have chip on their shoulders, and some guys that aren't, and we're going to get those guys kind of at the front of this program.
On Facebook, Teresa Stewart says, go Big Orange. Pruitt's getting our orange blood pumping here in Knoxville. Excited. And I'm going to check on the YouTube comments and give you a chance to respond to Teresa, because, I mean, that's exactly what you assume Vols fans would be saying. That's exactly what Teresa is saying.
Yeah, no, and it's just, I just think that the way that Jeremy Pruitt has come off so far in his time at Tennessee is that it's so much different than it was under Derek Dooley, and it's so much different than it was under Butch Jones, and it really is kind of a left turn from where this program's been headed. It really is. It's an opportunity for Tennessee fans to look at it and say, we want to have fun with everybody else, and we want this hard-nosed coach. We want guys that are playing with effort, because he says in that clip, you don't have to have all the talent in the world. I want guys right now that have the effort. And you see that him preaching that right now to his team on that video. I think it's beautiful for them to look at.
Logan Westerman says, speaking of the Vols, did y'all know that Peyton Manning played a bull in the new Ferdinand movie? The truth is, I don't know if Logan's being serious about that or if he's joking. I don't know if it's a joke that I just don't get. But they're having a good time over in the YouTube comment section.
Listen, the last thing you want to ask me about is any kind of movie trivia. I promise you, I won't give you the right answer on that, especially not
That's
about
also
Peyton.
a kid's movie. Like, you got to understand something. I know every kid's movie in the world now, because that's all I watch in my house all the time.
Ferdinand?
I believe it's the animated bull movie, I believe.
I don't know. I don't know about movies. I for sure don't know about kid movies.
Yeah, listen, you hold off on knowing about those kid movies as long as you can, because once you go down that road, life is a very different thing.
It's a slippery slope.
It's a very slippery slope.
I'll try to hold off.
Let me instead just do item number 4 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Kirby Smart spoke to the media on Saturday, addressing how the Georgia practices are kind of coming along, and Obviously, a lot of questions about that quarterback comparison, competition, if you will, between the incumbent starter Jake Fromm and the hotshot incoming freshman Justin Fields. How does what's going on with Fromm and Fields compare to what happened a year ago with Jake Fromm as the freshman, also competing with the then incumbent starter and former 5-star prospect Jacob Eason? I thought that Kirby Smart gave a pretty interesting answer to this. Here was what Smart had to say about his quarterbacks now, how they're different than his two quarterbacks from a year ago.
I think it's a little different because I think Jake obviously played more games than Jacob did with the success we were able to have, getting the extra games. He's picked things up well, and Justin's a very advanced quarterback, similar to how Jake was coming in. So those guys have they've done a good job picking it up. I'm extremely pleased with the leadership both of them provide, and also kind of how they push the defense. I mean, Jake's out there competing each day.
Yulia, your swale in the comment section says Jake Fromm was prepared better coming out of high school. I believe that the commenter's right about that. Kirby Smart can't say that. But what you do hear from Smart there, and I talked about this morning on Dog Nation Daily a little bit, is the absence of games being played. You know, I think last year when Kirby Smart talked about his quarterback situation, there was a lot of effort at kind of just sort of playing games. You know, he's talking up Fromm as a way of pushing Eason. Then he's praising Jacob Eason as a way of trying to build his confidence back up after Eason really probably didn't finish the spring on too strong of a note. It seemed like there was always some sort of ulterior motive around everything that Kirby Smart said about his quarterbacks, either positive about Fromm or positive about Eason. There seemed to be a reason for it. Right there, and you may hear this different than I do, I sort of don't take any kind of like motive or extra meaning in what Kirby Smart says. He says Jake Fromm's a good leader, he's a good quarterback. Justin Fields is a good leader, he's a good quarterback. He sounds sort of pleased with both of them, and there's this sort of absence of silliness or absence of narrative pushing about anything that Kirby says there. He's got a starting quarterback who's probably going to be pretty good. He's got a incoming freshman who may live up to the hype, and for Georgia, I guess, ends up being a good problem to have if it does indeed work out that way.
I couldn't agree more. And this is such a different 2018 issue, right? I mean, this is something that when I was playing football at Alabama back in, obviously, 2005, 2006, you had to worry about this. Now these kids, they leave practice, they go eat dinner, they're on their phone. They're reading about practice reports. They're reading about what was the headline of the day. They're reading Dog Nation Daily. They want to know what all was going on that day out of practice and what everybody saw and what Kirby Smart said after practice, what this coach's thoughts were, and all this stuff going on. So this is such a different thing. But you're right, this narrative where these coaches get these messages out to players, it's very real. But Kirby Smart, it was very no nonsense. It was very, listen, they're both very good. They're both going to compete. They're both extremely talented. Jake Fromm is this. Justin Fields is this. Let's let everything pay out in front of us. I love the way Kirby Smart is starting to approach this because he's not tickling anybody. He's not saying, listen, this might happen or this might happen or, let's wait and see or Jake Fromm's this. He's just kind of telling you as it is and saying, listen, let's let this thing play out.
Kelvin Bell says, who's a Georgia fan, says, who's going to stop UGA? Hashtag nobody. And that might be true. Georgia may be a steamrolling team here in 2018, but I think you would agree as a guy that's played on professional teams and college teams, teams do have a tendency to stop themselves if they get distracted by the wrong stuff. So while Kirby Smart's saying everything he needs to about Fromm and Fields right now, you got to be careful if you're Georgia that you continue to manage this right.
Yes.
You understand what I'm saying? I mean, you've got two really talented quarterbacks. The last thing you want is for fans to sort of divide up on both sides, for players to potentially divide up on both sides. You do have to be careful how you manage that part of it, and that's a job for Kirby Smart here.
It's never as easy as you think it's going to be. And I tell people this all the time about Alabama and managing the expectations because, listen, I was on part of two teams that went through the undefeated regular season in 2008, 2009. We almost got beat by Tennessee on a rocky block. We had to go to overtime with LSU. I mean, there's game after game where it's just never that easy. And it takes one of those interceptions or pick six going the other way to really flip things around. Then all of a sudden your offense is backed up. Then all of a sudden you're on the road and you're backed up in the student section. You can't get off the 1 yard line. They've got a better punter than you. He's pinning you back deep. Saw it against Auburn. Saw it against LSU. It's never as easy as you think it's going to be. And these players have to continue. All the paperwork says that Georgia should beat most of the teams on their schedule this year. But they have to continue to show up week in and week out. They have to go down to Jacksonville and play a rising Florida team. I don't think it's ever as easy as you think it is, and it's going to start and end with that quarterback position.
Maurice Carter, who's a Georgia fan, says, I love Jake Fromm and his effort and canniness, but once Fields picks up the offense, you're going to see a big difference in dynamic to the offense that's going to run. I certainly understand where people come from on that. Now, obviously, I have this conversation with Georgia fans in some form or fashion seemingly every day. But overall talent, arm strength, things like that, that's not the end-all, be-all of the quarterback position. If you just look at Fields, he does possess some things that Jake Fromm doesn't have and will never have. I hate to sound like such a cliched sports talker guy here, but there is an element of Fromm's value that can't as easily be measured, but it doesn't mean it isn't just as real.
You know, it's there's a higher ceiling physically, no question, for Justin Fields. But there's also a lot of things that Jake Fromm has that you're not sure yet if Justin Fields will ever have too. I mean, and we talked about this the week you were gone, the mentality of Jake Fromm being able to come in and deal with his business the way he did last year is more impressive than any 40-yard dash or more impressive than any 75-yard throw that you're going to see out of a recruit that's coming in. It's so hard to show up with that mentality and go to practice with a workmanlike attitude and adjust to not only playing the college football game at that level, to moving away from your parents, to moving your hometown, to being in the college football crowd. I'm telling you, it's impressive the way Jake Fromm did. I don't want to take away and just easily dismiss what he brings to a football team. Obviously, Justin Fields has some tangible things, broad jumps, high jumps, 40-yard dash that Jake Fromm can't do. But I'm telling you, up here, you need to continue to be impressed with what Jake Fromm's doing up top.
Well, last thing, and we'll change the subject, we'll talk some South Carolina for a moment. But these Florida fans try to stir up trouble. Rick Keene says, Fields going to transfer after he sits on the bench behind Fromm. You got Greg Steele who says, why isn't Fields considered a flop if he's not challenging for the starting quarterback job? Listen, Fields beating out Fromm is a lot different than Emory Jones beating out Felipe Franks, who did not exactly set the world on fire last season.
I mean, I think it's a fair question to ask. I honestly,
come on. I mean, Fromm's a solid starter, as solid a starter as you could be.
Whoa.
Fromm's 10-1 to win the Heisman.
Wait, we've talked a ton about Emory Jones and his ability to beat out Felipe Franks. We've also talked about, is Jalen Hurts going to transfer if he's not able to get on the field? And we've talked about, if some of these younger guys don't develop in systems, do they head out? Because Justin Fields is a guy, as the #1 overall recruit in the country, that expects to be on the field. I mean, that's point blank. So how can Kirby turn around a year from now and say, we want the #1 recruit, we really need you this year, and the one last year didn't get on the field? I don't think it's a talking point, but I think it's fair enough to bring up from Florida fans and say, listen, Justin Fields probably needs to find a way to get on the field this year.
Y'all don't worry your pretty little heads about how Georgia's going to handle its quarterback situation.
Listen,
don't worry your pretty little heads.
Y'all got BA riled up over here. Y'all done got BA riled up.
All right, let me do item number 5 on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Some interesting stuff coming out of South Carolina practice, both in terms of what Will Muschamp is saying and what people are saying about the Gamecocks. One of the things that's being talked about here is the fact that the Gamecocks apparently are intent to play much faster here in 2018 with Brian McClendon and Dan Warner sort of having their influence over the offense now that Kurt Roper is out the door. How is all of that going so far? Well, a couple of days ago, Will Muschamp sort of let us in on his thoughts about the new South Carolina offense. Here is Muschamp.
They look good. I think it was one of the things I addressed with them at the end. I said, our tempo's got to continue to improve and get better, and we've got to have that spot the ball mentality on both sides of the ball. We were dragging a little bit on defense, but there's no doubt that it benefits our football team. You saw some things that opened up in the running game and the passing game because of the tempo today, but it also helps our defense as well in preparation for the fall.
So I think that's really interesting there. I also saw, who Peter Burns is. He's an SEC network analyst. He's doing a radio show now, too. And he tweeted out today that he had Tommy Luganbill, the ESPN analyst, on his show. Luganbill had been at South Carolina practice. And what Luganbill apparently told Peter Burns was that the Gamecocks looked like Oregon from like the Chip Kelly, Mark Helfrich years in terms of how fast they were practicing. And he said it was really amazing how much faster they were practicing offensively compared to what they had been the year before. This is not a criticism. This is just, to me, an objective opinion. That may be true during practice right now. I don't think there's any way that Will Muschamp will actually tolerate that once the games begin. Maybe he should. I just don't think he will. I think this is one of those things that we sort of get ourselves sort of wrapped up in the spring of South Carolina's going to play much, much faster. Muschamp is still a defensive-minded coach.
Yeah.
He's not going to put his defense in a bad situation. And for the most part, we don't see that many examples of really, really fast on offense and really, really good on defense. You've got to slow down to help your defense for the most part, and ultimately Muschamp's going to lean in the direction what helps his defense.
I do think it's good. I think it's good to have both gears, though. And this is something that came out of bowl practice when Brian McClendon took over for Kurt Roper. Everybody was talking about how fast-paced this offense was. They were getting it. And it's not only just about what the offense is going to look like in the fall. I mentioned this to you the other day. You got to get those snaps in practice. There is a time limit on college football practices. Getting those snaps and getting them up, and we talked about energy at practice, make sure everybody's getting some rep somewhere on the field. So doing that and doing that at an Oregon pace, I think is a big deal just for practice. But when you look at things as far as the fall goes, I think this is the opportunity for Will Muschamp to change some things as far as the offense goes, because we've always asked the questions, what does Will Muschamp's offense look like? It hasn't worked so far. It didn't work under Kurt Roper at Florida. It didn't work under Kurt Roper at South Carolina. Maybe Will Muschamp is doing the Lane Kiffin, Nick Saban thing where he looks at it and says, maybe it's time to try something different. I'm not telling you they're going to do it every time, but there is the opportunity once you get that first down, and once it's first, second down, you need a third and short, get up to the ball, snap the line of scrimmage, get the first down, and then snap the other play. And I think now is the opportunity to do that. They have 8 returning starters on offense.
Here's the problem, though, and it may be time to do it. You're right, but the temptation to not do it is, I think, it's going to eventually be too great, because you said something a moment ago. You said, hey, you got to have both gears. You got to be able to play fast and then also slow things down when you need to. I can only think of one team that's successfully done that, and that's Alabama. You go back to the Kiffin years running that offense where they did play fast. Believe it or not, they ran more plays per game than Auburn did. A team that you think of as being much more up-tempo. Alabama was running more plays per game than Auburn was. But the reason why you forget or you overlook Alabama being a tempo team is because they still ran the football.
Right.
Most teams don't have the power running capabilities to match with the up-tempo passing game or the up-tempo offense Alabama did. Therefore, it was not putting its defense in a bad position. Most teams that play up-tempo do hurt their defense. Look at Auburn before Kevin Steele gets on board, back when it's still Will Muschamp leading that offense. They're running 1 million plays per game. They're like 95th in the country defensively because there's no free lunch. If you go 1,000 miles an hour on offense, there's a payback coming somewhere, and it's usually on your defense. For South Carolina, I'm not saying it's going to be quite that dire, but if you trade up-tempo offense, you're sacrificing something defensively for that. And a defensive-minded Saban disciple like Will Muschamp, I just don't see him making that trade.
Yeah, and here's what I think is interesting for South Carolina fans to look at what this could be next year when you talk about the trade-off. South Carolina, while I think their defense will be much improved, when you look at the guys in the secondary they have, when you look at some of the sack leaders and some of the linebacking core they have coming back next year, very good. But I don't know that the depth lies to have that kind of offense. You know what I mean? Like you can't expect the guys to do kind of both things and have this. You have to have the depth. If your offense is going to have a scoring drive in 10 seconds, you got to be able to rotate defensive linemen in and out too. I don't know that lies at South Carolina, but I'm just telling you, it's nice to be able to do both. And when you get to the fall, if you do develop that depth, be able to, hey, listen, remember what we did in the spring? We're about to do that right now and kind of run this ball down your throat.
Hardwired to Self-Destruction says Georgia can sleep on Muschamp if they want to. Georgia's arrogance is going to be their undoing. If you're reading my comments now as arrogance as a Georgia fan in reference to Will Muschamp, you're misreading me. I think that Muschamp's building something really good at South Carolina. I think the Gamecocks are a formidable opponent. But they are a formidable opponent in so much as they're tough to stop. They've got a quarterback who can make some big throws. If you tell me that South Carolina is going to try to play a team like Georgia and try to beat them with an up-tempo pace, I think that game just got easier for Georgia to win.
It's possible. It's possible because Georgia does have that depth, right now in a lot of different spots, and Georgia's got the offensive line to be able to pull that off. And I think that, listen, Jeremy Pruitt's not going to do this. Let's look at the alternative. Jeremy Pruitt is going to a pro style. Hey, we don't have the depth defensively right now to be able to run the up-tempo offense and to be able to rotate 8 deep along the defensive line. So you know what we're going to do? 10-play drives, pro-style offense, Keller Christ at quarterback. We're going to run the ball right down your throat, and we're going to hope that the time possession is 40 minutes Tennessee to 20 minutes whoever else we play, and that's going to be his blueprint. That's what I think is scary if you're a South Carolina fan. You look at the offense, we can be really explosive, we can get 85 snaps every game, but do you have the depth on defense? So I agree with you to that extent, and I think that if that's going to be your game plan, I think South Carolina has to jump out really early and often on Georgia if that's going to be their game plan in the game.
All right, let me do item number 6 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list, and I thought that Mike Griffiths had sort of an interesting take on this. There was the report out there that Alabama may have aided Tennessee, or at least attempted to aid, in Tennessee's coaching search that was originally started by John Curry that ultimately led to the hiring of Jeremy Pruitt after Curry had been ousted from that job. Let me get ready to let you hear from Mike Griffith, who made an appearance on the Alabama SEC Country podcast. It's hosted by Ryan Fowler. Ryan brought Mike on. Mike kind of explained some of the situation here and kind of how all this came to be. Here's Mike Griffith with Ryan Fowler.
Alabama, they know they've got a task ahead of them. Greg Bird, Ryan, they've done a lot of research. They put together a lot of data to figure out who the next great coach might be. I uncovered that during this open records search because for some reason Greg Byrne felt compared to share that with Tennessee.
So so Alabama builds this sort of like dossier, I guess is the right word, of who they would rank as the best coaches in college football. And they essentially, some Alabama staffer that works in the athletic director's office, passed it over to John Curry. That we find this out because of an open records request. There is no record of Curry responding to this email that even used this data, but Alabama apparently helping its third Saturday in October rival with its coaching search of, hey, here's some stuff we put together on who's a good coach. Now, let me start with this. It doesn't make any sense to me why Alabama would do this. The person from Alabama who did do this, was it a way to sort of keep them off of Jeremy Pruitt? Was it a, listen, we're just going to be nice to you. We want you to waste a bunch of time looking at something that doesn't really matter. The motives here are unclear to me. So since I'm not sure what's going on here, I'm going to adopt the premise that Mike Griffith brings up of how much this rivalry has fallen. Yeah. If Alabama doesn't think twice, or a Stafford Alabama doesn't think twice about passing some data over to Tennessee. Is that your read on this too, that these two teams are supposed to hate each other, beat each other's throat, not helping each other?
My read on it is that Greg Byrne's new to this. You know what I mean? Like, Greg Byrne's been at Alabama a year now since Bill Battle, left the 80 position in Alabama. They had to search for Greg Byrne. I think they brought him in from Arizona State or something. He's new to this. You know what I mean? Like, he hasn't been a part of this Alabama-Tennessee rivalry. He doesn't understand it. I think what Greg Byrne looked at it, and whoever the staffer is that emailed over and thought, boy, this guy's in a bad spot. I'm going to try to help him out as much as I can because this is professional to professional. I don't think he looked at it as Alabama to Tennessee. I think he looked at it as AD to AD. Let me try to help this guy out. I don't know that he's got the pulse of Alabama fans in that regard, though. I think Alabama fans look at it and go, boy, you really need to start getting the pulse of what's going on around here before you start passing information over. I would love to have that list. I would love to see what that list was. Was Greg Schiano at the top of that list? You know what I mean? Like, was Jeremy Pruitt at the top of this list?
I think the list has actually been published. I don't have the full thing in front of me here, but the names at the top are the same ones that show up every summer when these websites produce these lists. I mean, Saban's 1, Myers 2. I mean, for the most part, the list itself is fairly predictable, and because it's on the open records request, so people have published the list. For the most part, the names are who you'd expect them to be at the top of the list.
I just think it's been so interesting, all this public records drop and everything that's come out. I mean, there was never, Chip Kelly's name was never brought up. You never saw Jeff Brom in any of these open records from everything that was going on with John Curry. It's been so interesting for me to look at it, and I just can't help but think that Greg Byrne saw somebody that was drowning with their hand up above the water, and he just thought, man, let me throw you some kind of life raft.
So here's the thing I'm thinking if I'm Tennessee, and a few minutes ago on our show, we talked about how Pruitt, in terms of what's being published in practice videos, things like that, saying all kinds of stuff that Tennessee fans are going to really like. So I think Tennessee fans have every right to be very happy with Jeremy Pruitt right now. But one of the next steps for him is he's got to make third Saturday in October feel like a rivalry again. And it's going to be tough to beat Alabama, right? I mean, it obviously changes if Tennessee beats Alabama, but that could be a long time still before that happens. But you got to start talking about how you hate Alabama, don't you? I mean,
yeah.
Isn't that, as Pruitt takes over at Tennessee, one of his meager goals? To at least make Vols fans know that the coach at Tennessee thinks of Alabama as a rival again. Yeah. Because when you've got a rivalry that's sort of gone cold, it's always the underdog's responsibility to sort of reignite that. Yeah. After Tennessee had won 4 straight with Peyton Manning as quarterback, it was Alabama's job to sort of reignite that rivalry again. Alabama's on a long winning streak right now. It's Tennessee's job to reignite that. Doesn't Pruitt have to do something to stir up the hornet's nest? It's going to be hard to do because he worked for Saban. Yeah. He's got respect for him. But isn't that kind of his job here right now?
That was kind of my response to Mike Griffith's column, and he wrote that piece on SC Country. And was like, boy, has this rivalry lost that much luster? And my answer was, all it's going to take is one time. All it's going to take is one time for Tennessee to beat Alabama. It's been 11 years in a row. I don't know what it gets to. I don't know when the streak stops. Maybe Jeremy Pruitt finds some kind of magic in a bottle and he's able to get it done sooner than I think he will. But all it's going to take is that once. And all it's going to take is for the cigar smoke to fill Neyland Stadium. Yeah. You won't be able to see from one side of the stadium to the other in Neyland Stadium. And that rivalry will be back on because somebody's face is getting smoke blown in it. And that's just the way that rivalry has always been. It's historic for a reason.
Josh Harris says it's hard to see someone as a rival when you haven't lost to them since 2006, which is the point you're making. I guess the point that I'm trying to make here, though, is what do you do in between now and the next time you beat Alabama? Because if Tennessee were to beat Alabama in the next 3 or 4 years, I would count it as one of the most shocking things we've seen in the SEC in a decade. Yeah. Tennessee does not have a roster anywhere near what it's going to take to beat Alabama unless Alabama happened to have its worst day, just that it's even imaginable. So what do you do in between now and that moment? I feel like you've got to do something to sort of rattle the cage before you get to that point.
Yeah, and it's possible that Jeremy Pruitt goes there. it's hard for me to see it because I've seen Jeremy Pruitt for so long in Alabama stuff, and I've seen him coach under Nick Saban, and I know the fact that he's an Alabama letterman, he's from the state of Alabama, so it's hard for me to think that Jeremy Pruitt's going to really poke the bear, before this game gets here, like the week out, him being like, we're going to go in there and really give it to Nick Saban's team. I don't care if they have more talent than us. It's hard for me to imagine Jeremy Pruitt doing that because I just don't think he's that style of guy. I don't know that Tennessee fans want that style of guy, though. I don't think they want the Lane Kiffin style where he's always poking the bear or tweeting or want that. I think they want somebody that's going to go to work making their team tougher, and I think that's what they've got.
Greg Steele says Peyton beat Alabama 4 straight. I think I am right about that, right? Peyton never lost to Alabama, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Never beat Florida, I don't think. Never lost to Alabama. Is that right?
Something like that, yeah, for sure. I don't think Peyton ever lost to Alabama.
Yeah, I think I may be right about that. Y'all check my math on that to make sure, though. Let me do item number 7 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Greg McElroy, the SEC Network analyst. Pretty interesting interview that he was a part of with our Alex Martin Smith from SEC Country. And I got to tell you, what McElroy said in this discussion about Texas A&M, I completely disagree with. Let me show you McElroy's comment, and then I'll respond to that. He says, I like Jimbo Fisher quite a bit at Texas A&M, but the SEC West is a different animal. To think that he's going to just go in there and wave a magic wand and win 10 games every year, that's a tall order. Just knowing that you have to play Auburn, Alabama, LSU every year, the schedule's just so daunting. So on the last half of that, McElroy's obviously true. A lot of grizzly bears in the SEC West that you have to deal with. But this notion that he scoffs at waving a magic wand, this is going to sound ridiculous, but hear me out. Think about every turnaround we've seen in the SEC. They've virtually all been wavings of the magic wand.
Yeah.
Nick Saban waved a magic wand in Alabama. They went from being you'll know this better than anybody because you played on these teams, a very much underachieving program to national champion over the course of about 3 years' time. Florida under Urban Meyer after the Ron Zook era, very much the same thing. The way that Kirby Smart waved a magic wand at Georgia in 2017 to get that program to the college football playoff when they'd been bumping into that ceiling under Mark Richt for quite some time. Richt, who won an SEC at Georgia in 2002, in his second year was also kind of waving a magic wand. I'm not guaranteeing you that Jimbo Fisher's going to have great success at Texas A&M, but virtually every turnaround that's happened in the SEC has been a dramatically quick turnaround. That's virtually the only way the change actually occurs.
I couldn't agree with you more. And to me, I think Greg is being a little bit short-sighted here because, listen, Greg's from Texas. He's from South Lake Carroll. He was a fan. I think he was committed to Texas Tech before he was committed to Bama. He was a fan of Texas. He's seen that Texas A&M program up close, so he knows it's a daunting task for a team from Texas, from some of those recruiting pools, to go out and win some of these big games. But tell me what Texas A&M doesn't have that LSU has. I guess LSU has a monopoly on their state as far as recruiting for the most part. They're going to get most of the Louisiana recruits. Don't tell me Texas A&M can't get some of those guys. Don't tell me Texas A&M doesn't have what Auburn has. I mean, Auburn's able to go in and win some of these games and win SEC titles and contend for national titles. So you can tell me about everything A&M hasn't done, but don't go back to 1970 and tell me about the Texas A&M Aggies in 1970. Nobody on that team was alive back then. And so I don't want to hear about what the ceiling is going back historically. Tell me about what Jimbo Fisher's going to do with Texas A&M in the next few years. There's no reason, in my opinion. I don't know what you guys think might be the opinion that Texas A&M is going to hit a ceiling here in the next 5 years. I don't know what it is. There's recruiting, there's money, there's coaching. I don't know what else you need for the ingredients to get back to that national championship caliber.
Kenny Houston brings up a good point. He says, but BA, how many of those teams are still ripping off the 10-win seasons? There's no magic wand. Yeah, listen, once you get on top, it's obviously hard to stay there. But as you said, A&M's got all the resources in place. Jimbo Fisher's done this before. There's no obvious reason why this can't happen. It may not happen. No obvious reason why it can't. Esteban Estevez says A&M will be great. Never. Now, listen, that's an LSU fan. Obviously likes the idea of fanning the flames of that rivalry. But you just touched on this. There is no, it's one thing if you live in a state where there's no talent, or it's another thing if you're a part of a program that has zero history or zero money. Those are some pretty big reasons to sort of argue against success. A&M doesn't have any obvious impediment to its success.
That's kind of my point, is that Greg's saying, boy, going back to 1970, Texas system. And then he points to Vince Young. Find your Vince Young. Find your. I don't care what it has to be. Tell me why Auburn's getting national championship contention and why Michigan's making a splash on the national stage, or USC. I don't see it. I understand where the talent pools are. Texas, and you've pointed this before. It's hard to find that Texas style of recruit that doesn't play that Big 12 style of offense.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you right now, there's enough talent coming out of Texas, going different places, and they can pull enough players from the state of Louisiana, maybe get one from Florida, maybe get one from Georgia, to be able to make them contenders. There's not a ceiling on Jimbo Fisher for me at A&M. They should be expecting national championship contention with all the resources at his fingertips.
All right, item number 8, SEC Country Live, our first and 10 list. I know you're not a huge movie buff, but one of the sports movies I've always loved is the movie adaptation, or adaptation, I guess is the right word, of Friday Night Lights. The TV series is also great, but the movie, when it came out back in 2004, sort of hit me at a time and when I was young and had a lot of free time, and I just loved this movie. And there's one great scene in the movie where the team's best running back, who's known as Boobie Miles, is not in the game. He's on the outside of the coach a little bit. And he lets the coach, played by, what is my guy's name here? Why am I blanking on the name? The actor that plays him. It's bad that I'm forgetting this. It's bad that nobody in the room has seen it. Who's the coach that plays?
Billy Bob Thornton.
Billy Bob Thornton, yes.
Look at that.
Thank you very much. The coach is played by Billy Bob Thornton. Boobie Miles wants to go in the game, and they have a great exchange on the sideline. Take a look at this.
Don't worry about it, coach. Let me spin. Let me spin, coach. Y'all want to win? Put Boobie in. Y'all want to win? Put Boobie in. I'm about to spin. Come on, coach. Come on, coach. Let me get this for you.
So put Boobie in. I'm about to spin. That's Boobie Miles there. And that's relevant because Auburn's got a running back named Jartavius Whitlow, who also goes by the nickname Boobie. And Whitlow showed out the other day at Auburn practice, and that got the attention of a few of his Auburn teammates. Here's an example of some folks who were impressed with the SEC's version of Boobie. Take a look at this.
I don't know, it's funny because I don't know where you got the name Boobie from, but what's the Friday Night Lights? When we put Boobie in, we go win. So that's what kind of reminds me of Boobie. He brings great energy, which we need at times. So all the running backs do.
Yeah, listen, look, the reports are Whitlow had a fantastic run the other day during the Auburn scrimmage, and if your favorite team's recipe for success in 2018 requires Auburn not to find capable running backs to replace Cameron Petway and Kerryon Johnson, if that's part of your recipe for success, then you're going to be disappointed. I don't know if it's Jartavius Whitlow that they call Boobie. I don't know if it's Asa Martin. I don't know if it's Cam Martin. I don't know if it's, whomever. Auburn's going to be fine at the running back position. It may be Whitlow. It may be something else, but it sounds like in a scrimmage, as we talked about yesterday, it was sort of heavily leaned in the direction of running backs. But those running backs look pretty good.
Yeah, and Jartavius Whitlow, and I've mentioned this a couple times on the show before, listening to Gus Malzahn talk about Whitlow back in bowl practice, about his ability to pick up the third down blitz, about his ability to be a 3-down back. Because listen, this guy was a 2A quarterback in high school. That's what Jartavius Whitlow was. 2A quarterback, literally got an offer from Auburn the day before signing day. I think he was headed to Tulane, if my memory is not mistaken me, I think he was headed down to Tulane to play and gets an offer from Auburn right before signing day. And that's what I think is so intriguing about this. For a lot of the players, it's like seeing this guy grow into being an SEC running back. The fans at Auburn haven't seen him, but I think they should be excited about what's coming out. Now, listen, I don't know. I'm with you. Cam Martin, Asa Martin, Devin Barrett, Jartavius Whitlow, Tolbert. I don't know who it's going to be, but all these guys getting 5 to 10 carries, and Boobie Whitlow is the name that really kind of jumps out for a lot of the players. I'm on board with this guy. Yeah. I'm just telling you right now, from everything I've heard and everything I've watched and everything I've seen, this guy right to me is the next Kerryon Johnson.
Well, he seems to have that explosive quality, whereas Johnson may have been more of a, between the tackles bruiser. Yeah. It sounds like Whitlow may be the sort of game changer with his speed and his elusiveness. And I sort of joked yesterday that the Auburn spring practice of the sort of, upper tier SEC teams maybe the least interesting, because it seems like they're going through a lot of nuts and bolts type stuff right now. Who are the new names on defense? What's the new pecking order at running back? Right now, Jarrett Stidham's not really going through any kind of practice. Scrimmage for the most part dominated by the defense, but running backs got a lot of carries. This is Auburn pretty quietly figuring some things out. But I renew the point that I've made over and over again. This is still a top 10 team. The game in Bryant-Denny Stadium obviously makes it tougher for Auburn being on the road at the end of November, but this is still a real heavy load to deal with for virtually everybody in the SEC West, Georgia included. They get the home game with Auburn this year, but that's no easy out for Georgia either.
I think they're having a little bit more of a battle than you're probably going to give them credit for, because it's 4 new offensive linemen, or 3 new offensive linemen. It's a new offensive line coach in J.B. Grimes, and you can talk about the depth of the running back core, but neither one of these guys are Cam Petway or Kerryon Johnson. That's not their names. And so when you talk about what Auburn has been, and we talked about this last year, Jarrett Stidham, for everything you expect him to be good, Auburn's still always going to be the running team. It's always going to be the running backs that carry load for this team. That's a lot of pieces that aren't in place. Now, it's not to say they can't be in place, because I think they're going to be very good up front and be able to run the football, but it's a lot of moving pieces. 3 new offensive linemen. We don't know if it's Calvin Ashley or Troxel. We don't know what Prince Tega is going to be at left tackle. We don't know if Kim's going to play the center. We don't know who the running back's going to be. Is J.B. Grimes going to get back into it? A lot of questions for me still moving forward.
Let's do item number 9 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Florida going through spring practice and busy on Monday with a trio of visitors. You had 5-star wide receiver Frank Ladson on hand, 4-star cornerback Tyreek Stevenson, and the 4-star linebacker, is it Gemon Eford? I'm probably just Jamon Eford. I'm probably obliterating that name. The point is not can I pronounce the name. The point is they are names worth knowing. All 3 of these guys. We'll show you some of the social media stuff. You see Tyreek Stevenson there, kind of put out on social media wearing the uniform. You see Jamon Wilson there with a nice. If he made that football, can you make a football spin like that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, no problem.
That thing's standing straight up in the air, though.
Yeah, it's spinning.
It's also
you can do that. We bring a football in here.
No, I'm a pretty good. What I'm telling you is, I'm a good enough football spinner to know that may be doctored video.
I got to tell you, I'm not trying to go down this road right now, but why they would ever go to those green and black uniforms ever again? Look how slick that looks.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I do kind of like they wore the orange jerseys, orange helmets when I was a kid. That's not a bad look. Now
that's a great look.
Now the young folks on the other side of the camera love the green Swamp Thing uniforms. But
don't get me started. The white cleats, the white wristband, that's sharp.
The point of the subject, though, is that this is exactly the business Florida needs to be in. Yes. There's too much 3-star talk at Florida. You got 2 4-stars and a 5-star here. These are the names that Florida ought to be entertaining.
Yeah, Tyreek Stevenson comes out and says after he leaves Florida that this is my dream school. I mean, there couldn't be better news for Dan Mullen in Florida when you talk about somebody of that caliber saying, this is my dream school.
The best I can tell, Frank Ladson didn't tweet anything. That would be the better news.
Frank Ladson comes out and says, they told me I'm the #1 priority, which you should be. You should be their #1 priority, Frank Ladson, because you're that good. And obviously, I think he's a #1 or #2 player in the state of Florida. Obviously, him being a 5-star wide receiver, he's one of those talents that Dan Mullen, at this day and age, when you talk about Florida football, everything we talked about, Dan Mullen, why you should get this job and recruiting in your backyard down there, this is the kind of guy Florida needs to get back to the level you expect from them.
But I just think look, a lot of folks take unofficial visits this time of year, but this is an example of where Jim McElwain wasn't enough, 3-4, plus star guys on campus the same day. Some of the early recruiting stuff for Mullen, maybe, I think for some Florida fans, leaves something to be desired. And, this is one of those things where I think I, as a Georgia fan, actually have some common ground with Gators fans. I've actually heard some positive remarks from Florida fans when I've challenged Florida to recruit better, because that's what they need to do. And This is an example of Florida entertaining the kinds of prospects that ought to be in Gainesville every single weekend.
Yeah, and the connection. And you talk about, and these players, obviously, I think they're both from Homestead. Stevenson and, I'm sorry, what's his name? Ladson. Both these guys are from Homestead down there in South Florida. So to make that trip up and talk about their relationship with these coaches, I mean, you tell me if I'm wrong, because obviously we've been doing the show a year. I didn't always hear the relationship talk about Jim McElwain and these recruits down there. And him being from Eastern Washington and being a West Coast guy, I'm not sure that always matched up. It's very good news, in my opinion, is what I'm trying to say for a lot of Florida.
And listen, Florida's a tough state recruiting right now. Taggart at Florida State's a good recruiter. Rick at Miami's a good recruiter. Even some of those middle-tier programs, Heupel's probably going to do a good job at UCF. South Florida has found a way to get players. It's not easy to recruit the Sunshine State right now, but if you're Florida, you shouldn't be second choice to anybody.
No, you shouldn't. You definitely shouldn't, and that's what I'm trying to say. This caliber of recruit has to be kind of a layup for Dan Mullen moving forward, and I expect it will be.
All right, let me do item number 10 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. We'll probably spend even more time this week talking about that data dump of emails, going back to the John Curry firing at Tennessee and the open records request that's made a lot of that public. The Athletic did an interesting thing where they sort of looked at a lot of the emails from Tennessee fans about who they wanted to be the next coach, and the Athletic reported that the overwhelming #1 name was the current FAU coach and former Vols coach Lane Kiffin. Well, Kiffin, never one to miss an opportunity, on Twitter noticed that and responded to it. He says, "Thank you for the love. Big Orange fans love you too. Hashtag good old Rocky Top. Vol Football, ESPN, Clay Travis, Paul Feinbaum." How about you shout out your boys at SEC Country?
Pretty sure Lane Kiffin follows me, or he once did. He probably muted me. But.
Yeah, how about you shout us out here as you're listening to that group of folks there? This is another challenge for Jeremy Pruitt. At some point in time, you got to make people at Tennessee forget about Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin is sort of a version of fool's gold, I believe, and I understand why Vols fans were looking for a sort of an easy out and sort of a quick change over there, but you got to move on past Lane Kiffin.
Oh, you definitely listen. You definitely do. When I'm talking about Jeremy Pruitt's to-do list at Tennessee, Lane Kiffin he's past the floor right now. I mean, he's so far down the list.
You're missing my point, though. If you do the things you're supposed to do, people will naturally forget about Lane.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree.
Just an example of the challenge it's facing.
It's the same way we talked about Nick Saban. And is Lane Kiffin going to continue to be kind of a thorn in Nick Saban's side? I just don't think so. I don't think anybody in Tuscaloosa worries about it. I don't think anybody in Knoxville really worries about Lane Kiffin anymore. See him tagging. I mean, he's tagging Paul Feinbaum. Yeah. I mean, he's doing this on purpose at this point, right?
Absolutely, no doubt about that. We close the show the same way every day. We're always looking for champions of life. It's our sort of look at the lighter side of college football and sports and the SEC and everything else in general. And today it comes from the world of college basketball. You may have seen, probably enjoyed seeing, Kansas beat Duke on Sunday. And you might imagine Lawrence, Kansas, big-time college town. They were living it up and loving life. In fact, we have a little bit of video here that somebody posted on Instagram of the celebration going down the way these kind of celebrations are supposed to. It doesn't look like anybody's doing anything too untoward there. Everybody's having a good time. Looks like everybody's staying safe. And the folks at the Lawrence, Kansas Police Department, we're in kind of an era in which police departments have senses of humor. Have you noticed this on social media? The Lawrence, Kansas Police Department, kind of one of the tops on that list. They had a funny tweet and sort of description of all this celebration. They say, there's a lot of drunken debauchery in the bars, plastic cups all over the street, traffic is flowing, and everyone's headed for the field house. In other words, everything's back to normal. You got to like that, right?
So jealous of that, the kind of basketball vibe, the March Madness thing going on. It's just something that I didn't get to experience when I was in college. I mean, because the football side was great at Alabama, the basketball side wasn't. Good for Kansas. I mean, I've got Kansas in my bracket, by the way.
Good for you.
Got them winning the national title. Don't let me down, Kansas.
There you go. You now know what Mike Johnson's looking like in his bracket, and we're all glad to find that out.
Feeling really good.
Absolutely. All right, so speaking of feeling really good, we'd feel really good if you check out our podcast. It'll be up for you on all the various podcast outlets, Apple Podcasts, Android, right here after the show. Also, share the show with your friends on YouTube, on Facebook. Let them know that we're talking about the SEC every afternoon here on SEC Country Live. Thanks for being with us today. We'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow, once again, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, for another episode of SEC Country Live.